noticed right after we were done with Tuesday night that audio did not record for our service. So we decided to kind of try it again and record, and hopefully it works out a whole lot better. So there's going to be some things that I did on service time Tuesday during the service that won't translate really well, but we're going to try to recreate to the best of our abilities, and we hope that this ministers to you and just impacts your heart and helps you grow, and hopefully this is something you can share. And for anybody who missed, we missed you, and this gives you an opportunity to catch up and kind of see what we started off and what we kicked off. So I began the night with just asking the question, who are the people you follow on social media? Like, who are those individuals that, you typically follow right away, see what they're doing and checking out? And then with that, who are the people you do life with? Like, for example, I shared the example, I'm a big fan of Mr. Beast. Huge fan. I would love for that brother to just kind of kick my door open and be like, yo, here's $10,000, and I would love to receive that money, right? But Mr. Beast is not a guy I hang out with on a regular basis. So who are those individuals that you follow on social media versus the people you do real life with? And sometimes we know that those intermingle. Those tend to mix up and kind of be the same people. Like, who are those people that you do with? Well, with that, I want to show you who I used to roll with back in the day when I was a whole lot younger. I had hair and everything like that. I'm going to see some pictures here on the screen. But here you'll see, some friends that I had. You'll see this guy in all white. Don't know if it's my left or right on how it's going to appear on YouTube, but the guy with the braids, that was my good friend, Derek Morris, back in high school. Derek was, one of my good friends. We hung out and things like that, and everything that Derek did, I wanted to do. If Derek was a big fan of Nelly, so he wore a Band-Aid on his face, so I wanted to wear a Band-Aid on my face. Derek would wear throwback jerseys. I would want to wear throwback jerseys. Derek wore them backwards, another thing that people did back in those days, so I wanted to wear my jersey backwards. Derek had braids, so I tried to grow my hair out. I know it doesn't look like I have a lot of hair, but I tried to grow my hair out and try to get braids because Derek had braids. I wanted to fit in and be like Derek. Whatever Derek did, I wanted to do. Now, I bring that up, right, and share that because I think COVID did something really, really interesting. We were all cooped up in our homes. No one could really go out and do anything like that. And so what we ended up doing is running social media. We ran to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook for my older folks listening to this. And we ran to those things and kind of typically found our own different groups, the groups that we kind of associated with. And slowly, we started kind of adopting some of what they believe and slowly became kind of like our identity. Let me just kind of explain before I get killed in the comment sections, like politically, right? Let's just talk about politics, right? I'm just going to kind of dip my toes in and I'm going to dip my toes right out, right? I don't want to stay in that pool for too long. But politically, you had certain individuals that became kind of political figures for whatever reason during COVID, whether it be mask or no mask, vaccine or no vaccine, whatever it was. You had individuals slowly kind of speak up, whether it be political figures or non-political figures, and people kind of started separating in camps, and whatever camp that you kind of encircled or the people that you followed, right, the people that you did life with, you typically had the similar ideology. We don't have to necessarily just kind of jump in politics, right? I'm gonna dip my toes right out, but we can just even look like, for example, like there's a group of people that came out, typically women. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I call them the granola moms. My wife is part of this granola mom group, right? Nothing wrong with granola moms. My wife is one I said, right? Like quickly, like, hey, dyes are bad. Sugar is no good. Quickly started trying to go more organic and natural. Listen, we were not all like that all the time. Like we sneak a bag of Cheetos, like I told people on Tuesday. We sneak a bag of Cheetos in the house every once in a while, right? Me and my kids start eating it, right? My wife eats it too. I'm not going to downplay it, right? But it's all organic and everything all natural and things like that. Fashionable folks, right? You start following some fashionable folks on social media, and then you're looking for all the best deals at Target. You're looking for all the best deals everywhere you look. So we have fashionable folks that you wear glasses even though you shouldn't wear glasses, and you're just way more fashionable than I am. You look at my attire. Like, yeah, Sly, man, if I could just get your credit card and go to Target, I can help you out. Man, I would love it. That would be a blessing towards me. Just help me and tell me how I need to dress, whether it be conspiracy theories or maybe just your favorite influencer or podcaster. Like, let's be real. The example that I used on Tuesday was like, look at just like Joe Rogan. Like Joe Rogan and his listeners typically are, there's a type. There's some similar characteristics. They act or may make jokes the same way, right? Whatever it is, our identity is typically found in our groups. No matter what group we hang out with, what group we do life with, our identity is kind of found in these groups. And these identities, right, and the identities you run into and what you find typically portray an image, and that image communicates, this is who I am. This is who I am. Now, when we're getting ready to gear up for the collective and kind of get everything going, man, I just began to pray, like, okay, Lord, like, where are we going to go? And I was already working on a sermon series on the 7 I am statements for a camp that I just did, and I was like, man, maybe we go that route. I had this sermon series that I had done previously called The Mount, and I started praying, like, okay, man, do I go with something that I already kind of had that I can kind of, work with? And as I began to pray, just like the Lord led me to here, just led me to Matthew chapter 5, and just begin to ask, okay, God, like, why? What's up? Like, why is this? And as I began to kind of read the Sermon on the Mount, man, just like my heart began to stir, began to move, because I really want to focus on what defines us, what makes us us. I want people to know who they are. And I think that's so vitally important, who they are. Not that all these other things that I mentioned are bad. Like, listen, for granola moms, like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be eating so much sugar and dyes. Like you're probably right. Like, maybe we should be eating more red meat or whatever the situation is, right? But I ultimately want people to know who they are, who God created you to be. Now, I'm not trying to sell you as well, like, hey, like, this is the group that you need to belong to. Like all the different groups that I mentioned, like collective just needs to be a group that you need to belong to. Like I want that and I desire that, but it's not the goal. But the people that you are gathered with tend to define who you are. And I want to see, who are you gathered with? Because like for me, right, back when I was younger, this 5'7", Hispanic boy was trying to get braids, wearing jerseys backwards, because my friend Derek in particular did that. And that defined me. And it changed my life, changed everything about me. And we know that COVID did that. People started getting into groups, and they slowly started being defined by these things. And I want to make sure that you know who you're rolling with. I want to make sure you know who you're gathering with. But more importantly, I want you to know the most important person you should be gathering with, the most important person you should roll with, and that being the person of Jesus Christ. And so that's the focus of this video. That was a focus on our talk on Tuesday, was ultimately on this idea of identity. It was the idea of this identity, because who you are, right? Your identity will define your activity. Your identity will define your activity. And that's the thing, like COVID has already kind of been gone for a while now, right? Some people still holding on, right? But by and large, like COVID has been done, like it's not in the news cycles anymore. We're not cooped up in our homes and things like that. But let's not lie and believe that the ramifications of COVID haven't still lingered on. Like, let's not believe like the effects of us being cooped up and being on social media all day hasn't really affected us. It really has messed up our identity. I think I've talked to plenty of individuals that honestly, they feel lost, like real people that feel really lost, don't know where to go. Like they had their life planned out February 2020. And here we are now in July of 2023, and everything's lost. Plans are gone, and they don't know what's up. And so really, I want us to kind of focus on this idea of identity, and that's where we're going to focus on here in this talk, and that I really hope ministers to you and just impacts you. Now, to be specific, this is what we're going to kind of navigate through this talk. This is what we navigated on Tuesday, and it's going to kind of be our jumping off point as we continue the rest of the series on the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus doesn't want half-hearted devotion, but requires you to identify with him and his teachings. I'm going to read that one more time. Jesus doesn't want half-hearted devotion, but requires you to identify with him and his teachings. Now, this will guide us tonight. This will move us everywhere we go. And to show you how well this kind of statement is going to guide us and move us, like the two main topic points, like two main topics that we're going to have tonight are mentioned on this statement that I said, what we're going to get specific with, right? Our points that we're going to kind of navigate this talk with is one, identifying with Jesus. And then the second point, identifying with Jesus' teachings. We're going to look at Jesus and why you should identify with him. And then two, why you should identify with his teachings. Because that's going to be so vitally important. And so here, this is the Sermon on the Mount. It addresses so many different things. You probably, if you grew up in kind of a religious household or not even in a religious household, there's many parts of the Sermon on the Mount that you're probably aware of, that you've heard, that have kind of entered pop culture and just kind of stayed in pop culture and have never really fully left. It addresses so many things that we're going to talk about in the coming weeks. But it starts by trying to answer this question: who do you do life with? Who do you gather around? And that's kind of really the talk, the theme, the name of the sermon, the gathering. Who are you gathering with? Who are you doing life with? And is it Jesus? See, we're introduced to this figure, Jesus, and he kind of appears out of nowhere. We look in Matthew chapter 1, and you're kind of quickly introduced to his genealogy, like where he had come from, and then you were introduced kind of like the common Christmas story. And then after the common Christmas story, it kind of disappears for a while. And we don't see him reappear until John chapter 3, where he goes and gets baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist. And then he kind of disappears again, and he spends 40 days in the wilderness, and there's lots of interesting, significant things that we just don't have time to dive into, but he disappears in the wilderness, and then he comes out. After being tempted, going through temptation, he comes out, and there he goes. He calls his first disciples, his first followers, and then here we're introduced to the Sermon on the Mount. Here we are. And now the people that he's calling to himself, his disciples, I think they're going through very similar issues I think that we're going through today. His people are going through very similar issues that we're going through today. They didn't really know who to roll with. They didn't really know who to gather around. Was it the Roman government? Was it the Roman government telling them what they need to do and how to live? You see some of his disciples are clearly in that camp. You see other group of his disciples that are into this Jewish system. Like, we believe that the Jewish system works and this is how we are, and Israel first and foremost. Like, that was the kind of the mentality. Then you had this other group that was just religious, this religious system, right? Do we gather around the Pharisees or the Sadducees, right? Do we go around with them? And then just ultimately, you always had people that just followed their natural goals they had in life. Man, I want to have 1,000 kids, because in those days they had like a kajillion kids, right? Like, I want to have a kajillion kids and live in my farm and live in my house and live happily ever after, right? And these pools that they had in their life, they were experiencing them and facing them, and they were very, very much divided. And so Jesus starts off in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew starts off in the Sermon on the Mount. He says this. He goes, seeing the crowds, he being Jesus, went up to the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So here you have this Jesus and this guy. Clearly, he's somebody different, right? You see this kind of holy moment happen at the baptism of when Jesus got baptized with John the Baptist. Clearly, you see something special. The Trinity's all presented. Jesus, the Son, is being baptized. The Holy Spirit comes down like a dove. God the Father speaking to him. This is my Son. Like, I'm well pleased. Like, listen to him. And people begin to be drawn to Jesus. They're very curious about who this Jesus is. People project that there was a lot of people. He had a huge gathering. It just wasn't just his disciples that we read about here, but it was probably a bigger group. And here he is teaching on top of this mountain, going up the mountain and beginning to teach him. Jesus had a following because they knew something was different about Jesus. Jesus, still to this day, is different from anybody else in all of history. He's completely unique, different from everything else, and different from anyone else. H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds, he also wrote The Invisible Man, The Island of Dr. Monroe, very famous author. This is what he had to say about Jesus. He said this: I'm a historian. I'm not a believer, but I must confess, as an historian, that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in history. That's the thing. Now, some of you who may be listening, watching, listen, you may not believe God is real. You may not believe God is is a real being, real person, exists anywhere in this world or in this universe. But I think for the majority of people listening, not to dismiss you, but for the majority of people listening, majority of you listening, your issue isn't that there's a God out there. You really don't have an issue with the God being out there. Your issue, I think for the majority of people, it's Jesus. Is Jesus really God? And if he is, how should I respond to him? How should I interact with this Jesus person? Matthew 7, 28 through 29 says this regarding Jesus, because clearly in that day, people knew that Jesus was different. And so this was what Matthew 7, 28 through 29 says. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teachings, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. Those people, I think, would agree with you, and I hopefully with all of us here, is that many people would agree that Jesus was different. Jesus was clearly different. And I think that's the rub for a lot of people. Like, people know that Jesus is different, but are they quick to jump out and say he's God? Most people kind of put a little hesitation, kind of put a little foot on the brake saying, listen, I'm not sure he's God. Is he some kind of like wild child that was wild and kind of walked around and talked some good things and was all about love and come on, peace and joy, man? Like, yeah, a lot of people say, yeah, clearly Jesus was that kind of guy. Good moral teacher, they'll say. But God, not necessarily sure I buy into this God thing. Love your neighbor, they'll point to. Care for the poor and sick. Turn the other cheek. People say, man, those are some good things that we can all get behind. But Jesus being God, I'm not so sure I can back that. Well, C.S. Lewis, I think, kind of looking at that issue, this is an argument that's been going on for quite some time. C.S. Lewis, who wrote Chronicles of Narnia, which, by the way, Netflix is dropping a Chronicles of Narnia kind of new series on there. So I don't know. I'm a huge fan of Chronicles, and I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis. But C.S. Lewis, kind of seeing that argument, wrote this in one of his most famous pieces of literature that he wrote. He says, I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus is a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else is a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up as a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. C.S. Lewis is basically saying this: listen, you want to write off Jesus as a crazy person? Do that. You want to say he's a demon or a devil that led plenty of people astray? Listen, you can go ahead and do that. Or you can bow down and worship him as Lord. Those are the options you have, because this kind of area, as a great moral teacher, Jesus didn't give room for that. As Jesus taught, he said, hey, listen, I am the Son of Man. As he went about, he's saying, hey, listen, I am the Son of God. As he went about, he said, hey, listen, I am God. I am the Messiah. He didn't give any room to be a great moral teacher. So where does that leave you? How do you view Jesus? And that's one of our goals that we're going to have here at the Collective. Like, we're going to want to push you and challenge you in this. We're going to want to push you and challenge you to make you just really think about Jesus. Was Jesus real? Clearly, we see this person change history. We want to push you in those areas, but we want to push you in the most important area we can push you regarding Jesus. Who is he to you? Who is he to you? Is he a crazy person? Is he a demon? Or is this Jesus really the Savior of the world? There is no other options to view this Jesus. Now, there are others who have an idea who Jesus is, right? They kind of grew up in church typically, right? They've gone through like the kindergarten ministry and have done the camps and have done all these things. They have an idea who Jesus is, right? But they only like to be associated with Jesus. They only come to the Christmas services. They only come to the Easter services, right? Come to the big special events. But by and large, they're just associated with Jesus. They don't want to be friends with Jesus, right? They like to go through the experiences. When they're going through tough times, they'll go ahead and pray for him, but they do not want to go ahead and be connected to the Savior. They kind of view him as this holy Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake, right? But overall, you're just trying to do all these things to please him so he can go ahead and give you some type of miracle. And that's wrong. That isn't okay. Jesus doesn't open himself up for that option either. Jesus is saying, hey, listen, I am God or I am not. And he just doesn't want general association or just being there just so he can experience some of the things of Jesus, but he wants you to go much deeper with him. It'd be like me, just imagine if I had that type of relationship with my wife. Like you know what? I like to be associated with her, but by and large, like, listen, man, I'm going to kind of live my own life and do my own thing. You'd be like, yo, listen, that's not right. Like that marriage isn't okay. Like they're bound for divorce. Like things are not okay there. But man, how many individuals grown up and have this kind of association with Jesus, like, oh yeah, I know who Jesus is, but man, have never dived into anything deeper, any type of deeper relationship with Jesus. And I think that's the thing within this Bible, right? It's building up to the story of Jesus. And when Jesus comes into the picture, you're confronted with this thought time and time again. Who is Jesus? Is he God or is he not? Or his promises true or are they not? And it doesn't leave space for anybody to sit in the middle. It doesn't leave space for anybody to say, oh, yeah, maybe. Like it's either he's God or he's not. No space in the middle. Do you accept him or not? And so here we have his disciples, right? And they're kind of going through that process as well. You really don't see them fully defined on who they believe Jesus is until Jesus dies on the cross and comes back from the dead. But Jesus goes ahead and has these disciples, these followers, right? And he's telling them, he's beginning to teach them, I am God. And he's beginning to kind of say, come and follow me. And he doesn't require casual fandom from them. He's actually required them to follow him. And even as his teachings, even as we go past that, like Jesus is demanding, like, listen, you come and follow me. This is what it takes and this is what it means to follow me. Listen, there's no casual fan with Jesus, right? There's no one right on the sideline. It's either do you follow him as God or do you not follow him as God? Now, let me kind of break some things down, like what is a disciple? A disciple typically had a disciple or typically a teacher, and the teacher would teach certain teachings, maybe would grab scripture and teach it in a certain way and educate his followers on how to live their lives. And when their followers, their disciples, began to graduate, quote unquote, right, they would go onto the real world, kind of teach and say, hey, my teacher kind of taught me this. This is the way that we're supposed to live. This is the way we're supposed to interpret scripture. This is the way we're supposed to do things. I would say, look at very similar to people that go to certain colleges, right? Like if you go, the analogy I use on Tuesday, that if you go to A&M, right, Aggies, right, there's a certain way that you typically graduate or not even graduate. You start wearing maroon right away, right? You start doing these chants at football games, right? You start wearing a ring when you graduate. Like there's all these different things that Aggies do. If you, like I mentioned on Tuesday, but if you went to San Jack, radically different, right? Your education and your schooling, right? You were typically associated for the rest of your life. You were associated with them and you kind of operated in a certain way because you came from that. An easy way that we can see discipleship is an analogy that I use all the time when describing disciples, because you see this in everyday life, right? But one of the biggest ways we see this idea of discipleship is in rappers. I think rappers are the best disciplers there are out there. You'll see here an image of what they call is a family tree, all right, all the different rappers, and you can see this real quick. You can kind of follow this, right? Different rappers come from different individuals, right? And they come from, you can say, a school. There's similar styles and cadences, beats, and so on and so forth. They come from that. But again, if you're not a big rap fan, you just look to superheroes, right? Like Batman discipled Robin. Like that's a very simple way that you're going to look at that. Batman was teaching Robin all the ways to become a crime-fighting crusader, right? That's what a disciple is, someone who's teaching them. And here's the reality. We're all being discipled by somebody. Whether it be those influencers you follow, the friends that you have, we're all discipled by somebody. For me, It was my friend Derek that I mentioned. And every single person you follow, there is always a cost in following them. There's always a cost. There's something you gotta give up. It's not only with Jesus, but it's with every single person you follow. Like for going back to my friend Derek. My friend Derek loved to break laws, so that meant I broke laws. And that's the thing when we talk about this idea of religion, church, Jesus, we never think about the cost. We never think about the cost. We always think, okay, I could do whatever I want, believe whatever I want, and I'll still go to heaven. I made this prayer once in my life. I throw money into a plate. I open the doors for old ladies. I say please and thank you. Like that must mean that I have Jesus in my life. And like, no, that doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you're Southern, right? Like that's all that it means. It has no a deep significance and weight. But for us, for the believer, is a person who follows Jesus. And that was my belief prior to becoming a Christian. Like I believed I could do whatever I wanted, right? And God would be okay with me doing whatever I wanted. Like Jesus really wasn't a savior for me. Jesus really didn't save me from anything. Like Jesus was kind of like this fairy God that was just kind of out there that sprinkled love dust on everybody and eventually turned everybody into Teletubbies or something, like, right? Like he wasn't really God. And I never understood who he was. I never understood what was good and what was bad. I didn't understand that my sin separated me from God. I didn't know that Jesus wanted to be my boss, not only of my church life, not only of my spiritual life, but of every aspect that I am. And this is kind of serious. In the Sermon on the Mount, towards the end and how Jesus ends, chapter 7 and verse 21, it reads like this. Jesus says this, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name? And did we not do mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. And that, for me, that's like the scariest verse in the Bible. Not necessarily for me, but so many individuals that I interact with. Because they believe that, listen, I've been baptized, I've gone through the kids' camps, like I've worshiped, I've raised my hands, I felt the goosebumps, like I've done all of that. And Jesus saying, listen, you can do all those different things, but I never knew you. Do you know Jesus? Do you follow Jesus? Jesus just isn't this feel-good message. He's saying, hey, are you following me or not? Because his message is one of hope. It's one of salvation. It's one of peace, but there is a cost. Are you following him or not? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he actually wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if you know who he is, man, he's like the pastor that everybody wants, man. Like this dude tried to kill Hitler, right, and got busted, and the Nazis killed him because he saw the horrificness that things that Hitler was doing. He's like, nah, we got to stop this. And so, Bonhoeffer wrote this: the followers of Jesus, for his sake, pronounce every personal right if, after giving up everything else for his sake, they still wanted to cling to their own rights, they would then have ceased to follow him. This is what Bonhoeffer is saying. Listen, that at any point, anytime, if you're saying, hey, I follow Jesus, right? I'm giving up all my rights. But at any point in time, you say, you know what? I'm going to take a break and I'm going to kind of go right back to this thing that I left. You cease to follow him. Basically saying you've never followed him at all. I think that happens with so many individuals. We really, truly don't follow him. We may make a decision, we may have said a prayer, and we think that is good enough, but we really, truly do not follow Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus, there's a cost. You begin to look like him, talk like him, and be more like him. So what is that then? Like, what does it look like to walk like Jesus and talk like Jesus and be more like Jesus? Well, that's what verse 2 beginning to dive into, identifying with his teachings. In verse 2, it reads like this: and he opened his mouth and taught them. Now to make sure, all right, you heard what I said, right? I said, and he opened his mouth and taught them. Like, this comes after his disciples gather to him. I just want to make a couple things clear, right? There's a difference between a disciple and the tasks of a disciple. Two completed things, a disciple and the task of the disciple, are what many other people will call works. People really believe that if I begin to do these works things and do this work stuff, that I will be able to enter heaven, that God will look at the things that I've done and say, hey, listen, you've done a good job. Come on and in. And that's not true. You have to be a disciple before you can do the works of a disciple, right? You can't truly accomplish the works of Jesus without being a disciple first. The analogy that I used on Tuesday, like there's a cooking order. There's an order to do things. There's an order to cook, right? And if you don't follow these orders, like if you came to my house and I didn't follow the cooking order, right, and just kind of started throwing some things in, it may taste okay. It may taste like hot garbage, right? There's a step, there's a process, there's a way to do things. So the reason why we're starting off here is because we want to begin to define your identity before we start moving to your activity. We want to identify who you are. Are you a disciple of Jesus or not? Because here's the thing, you can't do good or be good without being a Christian, which all that means is a little Christ, a little Jesus. And I think so many of us have that mentality. Like, listen, I can do all these different things, but not really fully commit my life to Jesus. It'd be like this, is like if I gave you gifts, right? And I gave you a lot of my time, but never wanted to be your friend. Like, I just wanted to give you gifts and just hang out with you, but man, I never really wanted to actually get to know you as a person, right? Or really associate myself with you in the sense of really calling myself your friend. You're like, yo, this is weird. Like, what does this dude want from me? Like, what's his deal? How many times do we approach God like that? How many times do we approach God with trying to do good and be, do big service projects, or mission trips, or man, we try to come in and worship, but we never say, hey, listen, Jesus, I'm following you. I'm following you. It just seems a little weird. We desire to do the works, not because we can get stuff from God. Many people believe that if I do good things, I'll get salvation, I'll get money, I'll get blessings. No, we do the works of God because He has loved us. We do the works of God because He has saved us. And we do the works because we're grateful of where He is in our life, that He's the Lord and Savior, that He has saved us. And that's why we do the works, not because we're trying to earn all those different things. There's an order, there's a process. You become a disciple, then you do the works of disciple. Because here's the thing, you were not created to be casual followers. You were not created to kind of just casually follow Jesus. And if you're here and you believe there is a God who created all these different things, that there's an order to the universe, you have to understand that He created you for a purpose. He created you for a purpose, and the purpose for you that He created for you is for you to know Him, to worship Him. And only when you identify with Jesus, then you can identify with His teachings. So where are you? Are you identifying with Jesus? And are you identifying with His teachings? Because this is the most important decision you can ever make. Towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where this is where we're going to end up, spoiler alert, where we're going to end up in about 4 more weeks. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 7, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the flood came, and the winds blew, and it beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. He says, if you move outside of that purpose of following Him and His teachings, if you move out of that purpose, what comes is destruction. One pastor out in Dallas-Fort Worth, he puts it like this. He says, listen, what Jesus is asking you is just common sense. If you're from the Houston area, when we had Hurricane Harvey, this was clearly obvious. If you built your house on a slab with the foundation, your house would be okay. But man, if your house wasn't on that, there was a good chance your house was going to float away. This is why beach houses kind of get risky, and insurance don't want to insure them all the time, because it tends to be a little risky. He's saying, hey, listen, let's do the obvious. And let's build our house on that rock. Let's build your house on that firm foundation. If not, there'll be a great loss. So as I was looking over my notes as I shared on Tuesday, again, I pulled a lot of this from a previous sermon series that I had done on the Sermon on the Mount. I came across a story that I had written about around 2015. There was a young lady who went to the Penn University. In 2015, she was a track star, highly recruited, just dominating the track world. Seemed like her life was okay, fine, wonderful. Instagram portrayed this kind of happy image, and then she committed suicide. And it was such a shocking thing. Even the New York Post, as I was looking at my notes, I'm like, man, let me kind of remember what went on, and I kind of Googled and found some articles, old articles about this story, and ran across an article from the New York Post that said, this young lady's Instagram did not match what she was experiencing, did not match her life. She was sad and depressed. And I know there's some nuances to mental health. I don't want to make it simplified. I know some people need counseling, medication, and so much more, and so much of it is not communicated. And I get that, and not to jump into the nuances of all that. What I can say, though, it just seems like her house was built on sinking sand. Her house was built on sinking sand. And the reason I could say that is because I did the same. Prior to becoming a Christian, man, I could say I identified with a lot of those things. On the outside, I seemed happy, but man, in the inside, I was depressed. I was extremely sad. At one point, I wanted to take my life. And then what stopped me was really just thinking about my mom crying. I was like, man, I just can't make her cry. I'm a bit of a mama's boy, so please forgive me. And it wrecked me. And so I was like, you know what? Instead, let me just kind of read my Bible. And I really honestly want to treat the Bible and religion as an antidepressant to help me recover from my depression. And then I was going to go back doing the things that I was doing. But Jesus had a different plan. God had a different plan. And I met him and I began to follow him. I began to gather towards him, and he completely changed who I was. And when I look at the lives of the individuals I used to roll with, man, I can tell you that God made a huge difference in my life. You're going to see the images again here of my friends that I took that picture of, that you saw the group picture of. There's one of my friends. Both of them have braids. If I'm not mistaken, in the picture, the one that's in all white, that was Derek. Man, Derek, again, like I mentioned earlier, loved to break laws. You hung out with Derek, you're going to break laws. Derek had some anger issues, and he ended up shooting his girlfriend in the head. By the grace of God, she lived. But man, last I heard, was doing some major time in prison. My buddy Sean in the blue, man, his story is even more tragic in so many ways. Man, he was a star football player, had high hopes of making it pretty big, definitely was going to play college ball. Who knows if he would have made it to the pros. And then one day he was out with his football team. They were partying, they were clubbing, and some things happened that night that this one guy put on brass knuckles and hit him in the jaw and broke his jaw. Got him angry and upset because his whole entire senior year, where he was being recruited and everything like that, got thrown away. He was seen as a troublemaker, so no one wanted to take the risk on him. And so he was angry and upset because his future was completely destroyed. And so, man, what was he going to do? What was going to be his reaction? And so Sean ends up joining the rival gang of the gang that jumped him that night. And one thing leads to another, and Sean experienced a drive-by where he didn't make it, where he died. And I remember receiving the phone call when I got Sean's story and that he didn't live, that he had died. I just remember weeping. Man, I was weeping for their lives, weeping for their kids that they left behind. But right in the middle, man, there's a little sense of peace that just kind of came through and said, man, that just kind of hit me with this idea of like, thank you, God, for saving me. God, like, you didn't have to save me, but you came in my life and you saved me. Thank you for saving me. The moment I quit following and gathering around Derek and my rap crew and all these people that I did life with, man, I found Jesus. And it completely changed my life. I was no longer depressed, no longer consumed with myself. I decided to build my house on the firm foundation. So that's my question. I found a life worth living for. What about you? Who are you gathering with? Are you gathering Jesus? And are you going to gather around his teachings? Thank you very much, guys. Hope to next week we don't do this and you'll catch it similar with people and people's reactions. All right, peace.